There is a particular kind of silence that exists in the Siberian taiga at -71 degrees that has no equivalent anywhere else on earth. It is not the silence of absence, not the silence of a quiet room or an empty street or a forest on a windless summer night. It is the silence of suppression, of a cold so absolute that it presses sound flat against the ground and holds it there. Birds do not call at those temperatures. The wolves, when they move, move without the usual sounds of movement. The snow is too compressed, too crystalline to crunch underfoot, and they pass through the forest like shadows of themselves, visible only if you are looking directly at them, and sometimes not even then. Valentina Yegorovna Starostina was not looking at the forest when it started. She was standing at her outdoor woodpile, 60 meters from the house, working through the mechanical process of splitting and stacking that she performed every evening before dark, a task that, at -71, required continuous movement to remain safe and allowed no pauses longer than a few seconds before the cold began its serious work on exposed fingers and the patches of face not covered by her wool mask. She was 77 years old, had lived alone in the small settlement of Badagayalita for the past 9 years, since her husband Vasily died of a heart attack one April morning while plowing the garden, and was in the specific physical condition of elderly Siberian women who have spent their entire lives doing physical work, not strong in the way that young people are strong, but durable in a way that young people are not yet and may never be. Her back hurt constantly and had for 20 years. She did not think about her back the way a younger person would think about it. It was simply part of the weather of being herself. What made her look up was not a sound. It was the behavior of her dog, Akhtar, a large Yakutian Laika she had kept for 6 years, trained to hunt and to warn, an animal of exceptional reliability whose signals she had learned to read with the accuracy of long familiarity. Akhtar had been lying near the woodpile in his usual position, head on paws, watching her work with the patient attention he always gave to her outdoor activities. Then, in a transition so rapid it looked like a cut in a film, he was standing, fully upright, every muscle in his body oriented in the same direction, toward the tree line 40 meters to the north, producing the specific low sound she associated with large predators in proximity. Not barking, vibrating almost. A sound from the chest rather than the throat. Valentina set down the axe and looked. The tree line at -71 in early January was a wall of darkness beyond the reach of the single outdoor light mounted above her porch, a light she kept burning from 3 in the afternoon until 8 in the morning, because in January in Badagayalita, 4 in the afternoon was full night and 8 in the morning was still more dark than light, and she was not interested in navigating between house and woodpile in complete darkness at her age. The light reached the woodpile with something to spare and touched the first few meters of open ground between the pile and the tree line. Beyond that was dark. Akhtar was looking into the dark. Then the dark moved. Not in the way that darkness moves when your eyes adjust and the shapes within it become gradually legible. This was actual movement, multiple points of movement, low to the ground, spreading laterally as she watched. She reached back and picked up the axe without looking for it, because her hand knew where it was, and she watched the movement resolve itself into shapes as it came forward into the edge of the light. Wolves. She counted 5 before she stopped counting, because 5 was enough information for the decision she needed to make, which was whether to go back to the house now or to stay where she was. The house was 60 meters away. 60 meters at -71 with wolves between her and the door was a calculation she ran in approximately 2 seconds. She stayed where she was, with the woodpile behind her and the axe in her hand, and Akhtar pressed against her left leg, still making that chest-deep sound. But the wolves were not coming toward her. She understood this after the first few seconds of rigid attention, when she realized their movement was lateral. They were spreading across the tree line, yes, but their orientation was not toward the woodpile. It was toward something to her left, something she could not yet see, that was in the open ground between the tree line and the western side of her property, in the area beyond the old equipment shed that she no longer used and kept locked. She shifted her position carefully, moving to the right of the woodpile to extend her sightline past the shed. She saw the bear, a female brown bear, large, moving in the heavy, lurching way that bears move when they are in serious distress, not the fluid, deceptively fast movement of a bear that is healthy and choosing its direction, but the desperate, inefficient movement of an animal that is being forced somewhere it does not want to go. Behind her, and slightly to her left, pressed against her flank in the way that young animals press against their mothers when the world has become too large and too dangerous, was a cub, a yearling, by the size, large enough to survive independently in most circumstances, but not in this one. The bear had clearly not gone into proper hibernation. This happened sometimes in disturbed individuals, bears who had been unable to accumulate sufficient fat reserves in autumn or whose denning had been disrupted, and she had been caught in the open by the wolves in the worst possible conditions. The pack was working the way wolf packs work with large prey that they cannot take directly, pressuring from multiple angles simultaneously, wearing down the prey's energy and attention, waiting for the moment of exhaustion or the tactical error that would give them an opening. The bear was fighting this with everything she had, lunging at the nearest wolves when they came too close, keeping herself between the pack and the cub, covering ground in the direction of Valentina's property, in the specific way that large animals in extremis sometimes move toward human structures, toward light, toward the one variable in a terrible situation that is different from all the others. Valentina had approximately 4 seconds in which all of this registered and in which she made her decision, which was not a decision in the deliberative sense. She did not weigh options, she did not consider consequences, she did not think about what a reasonable person would do. She simply took 3 steps to her left, away from the woodpile, into the open ground between herself and the bear, and she began to shout. This requires some explanation, not of the courage involved, because Valentina would have rejected that framing entirely, but of the logic. She had grown up in this landscape. She had spent 77 years in proximity to its wildlife. She understood bear behavior and wolf behavior with the practical, granular knowledge of someone who has lived alongside both for decades, and she understood that a pack of wolves in the middle of active prey harassment is operating in a state of concentrated focus that excludes peripheral information until that information becomes too large to exclude. A person shouting, moving, waving a heavy axe in the yellow light of an outdoor lamp with a large dog beside them producing its loudest available warning sound. This was information that could not be excluded. She knew this the way she knew how to split wood and stack it to dry properly. It was simply knowledge. The wolves stopped, not all at once. The pack's attention fragmented, different animals orienting toward this new variable at slightly different moments, their formation losing its coordinated pressure as individual members processed what they were seeing. Akhtar had stopped pressing against her leg and was now 3 meters ahead of her, fully committed to the largest possible version of himself, every hair on his spine upright, his voice at its maximum. Valentina was still moving forward, still shouting, not words that she was choosing, simply the loudest sustained sound she could produce, which was considerable, because 77 years of outdoor Siberian life does not produce a weak voice. The pack pulled back. Not in panic. Wolves do not panic. It is not part of their equipment. But in the specific way that predators recalibrate when a situation has changed in a direction they did not anticipate. They moved back toward the tree line without urgency, maintaining their formation, watching. 2 of them sat at the edge of the darkness and watched for several minutes. Then they were gone. Valentina stopped shouting. Her throat hurt. The cold in her lungs hurt more. She stood in the open ground and breathed in the shallow, careful way she breathed in extreme cold, waiting for her pulse to normalize, and looked at the bear. The bear was 12 meters away. She had stopped moving when the wolves pulled back. She was standing with her full weight on all 4 feet, which is not a threatening posture, and she was looking at Valentina with the dark, deep-set eyes that brown bears have, eyes that communicate very little to humans in the way that dog eyes communicate, but that Valentina had looked into enough times in her life to read the absence of aggression in them when it was present. The cub was pressed against the bear's left side, face buried in her fur. They looked at each other, the old woman and the bear, for a period of time that Valentina later estimated as perhaps 30 seconds, and that felt like longer. Then the bear sat down. Not lay down. Sat, in the way that bears sometimes sit, on their haunches, almost upright. She sat and breathed. Valentina could see the breath in the air, enormous clouds of condensation from enormous lungs working hard. And she did not move toward Valentina, and she did not move away. The cub, feeling the cessation of movement beneath him, peered out from the fur and looked at Valentina with the frank, uncomplicated curiosity that young animals of any species direct at novel things. Valentina understood the immediate situation practically. The wolves had pulled back but had not left the area. She could not know where they were in the dark forest, only that they were almost certainly still close, because a pack that has been working prey does not simply abandon the effort on the basis of one disrupted approach. The bear was exhausted and not in a condition to survive another sustained harassment in the open. The temperature was -71 and falling, not rising, and would continue to fall until approximately 4 in the morning. She had a large equipment shed 8 meters to her right, with a padlock she kept the key for on a hook inside the house. She went to the house. She got the key. She told Akhtar to stay. He stayed, standing in the yard between the shed and the tree line, visible and loud, the most effective deterrent available to her in that moment. She went to the shed and opened the padlock. The shed was cold. Of course it was cold, everything was cold. But it was out of the wind, and it contained, among the old equipment and stored materials, a substantial stack of hay she had never quite gotten around to dispersing after keeping goats there the previous winter. Hay, in extreme cold, is insulation. It holds body heat in a way that open air does not. She left the shed door open. Then she went back to where she had been standing and looked at the bear and the cub and the open shed door, and she did the only thing that made sense, which was to step aside and stand very still. It took the bear 4 minutes. Valentina timed it without intending to, because she was counting her own slow breaths to control the cold in her lungs, and she counted approximately 40 breaths at roughly 6 seconds each before the bear rose from her sitting position, looked at the shed door, looked at Valentina, looked at the shed door again, and moved. She moved carefully, slowly, checking each step, the cub glued to her side, across the 12 meters of open ground and into the shed. Valentina closed the door. Not locked. She left it on the simple latch that could be pushed open from inside. She did not know whether a bear understood latches and did not intend to trap an animal that might decide later in the night that it wanted out. She simply closed it against the wind. She called her neighbor Arkady Spiridonovich at 9:30 that evening. It was fully dark by then and had been for hours. Arkady was 68, a former hunter who had worked for 20 years with the Wildlife Management Authority before retirement and who kept contacts in the Yakutsk Conservation Office that he updated annually the way other people update address books. He listened to Valentina's account without interruption, asked 2 practical questions, the approximate size of the bear and whether she had seen injuries, and said he would make calls in the morning. Valentina said the morning was fine. The bear was in the shed and was not going anywhere tonight, and neither were the wolves, and neither was she. The wildlife officers arrived the following afternoon. 2 of them, both experienced, both equipped for field work in extreme conditions. They assessed the bear through a gap in the shed planking before opening the door, and when they opened it, they found her in the hay with the cub curled against her, both of them in a state that one of the officers, a woman named Galina, described in her report as alert but calm, no signs of aggression upon approach, body temperature and respiration consistent with deep rest rather than torpor. The bear had, in some approximation of the thing her biology had been trying to do for weeks, finally slept. Galina examined the bear carefully and found no significant injuries. lacerations on the left shoulder from a wolf bite that had not gone deep enough to cause serious damage, and the general physical deterioration of an animal that had been inadequately prepared for winter and had been running on reserves that were nearly exhausted. The cub was in better condition than his mother. Younger animals metabolize cold differently, and he had had the benefit of her body heat and her protection. Both could survive, Galina assessed, if the bear was given the opportunity to complete the rest she needed. They left them in the shed. This was not standard procedure, and Galina said so clearly, and also said that the non-standard procedure was correct in this case. Moving the bear in her current state carried risks that staying did not, and the shed was adequate shelter. They would return in 3 days to reassess. They asked Valentina to leave the shed alone in the interim and to let them know immediately if the situation changed. Valentina said she would, and they believed her because she was the sort of person whose word is immediately believed. Over the following 3 days, Valentina managed the situation with the same methodical practicality she brought to every other aspect of her life. She moved her woodpile activity to the front of the house. She kept Akhtar closer than usual. She did not go near the shed, but she listened, morning and evening, standing at what she judged to be a respectful distance, and heard, on the second morning, the small sounds that she associated with the cub moving and being active, which she took as a reasonable sign. On the third day, Galina returned alone. She checked the shed, found both animals in good condition, the bear significantly more alert, and the cub emphatically ready to be somewhere other than a hay shed. She noted in her report that the hay had been substantially rearranged into what appeared to be a deliberately constructed nest, a behavior observed in bears who are in light sleep rather than full torpor and who respond to their environment with more active engagement than fully hibernating bears. The question of release was straightforward. The bear needed to leave of her own decision and in her own time. Opening the shed door and waiting was the only viable approach. Galina opened it at noon, when the temperature had risen to -58, which was as warm as that January was going to get. Then she and Valentina stood at the corner of the house and waited. The bear appeared at the shed door 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway for a long time, several minutes, looking at the yard, the tree line, the sky, checking, running whatever calculations brown bears run when they are deciding whether the world outside a shelter is safer than the world inside it. The cub appeared behind her, head below her shoulder, looking past her at the same landscape with the specific alertness of a young animal whose understanding of the world has recently been updated. Then the bear walked out. Across the yard, across the open ground, into the tree line. The cub ran the last 10 meters, the way young animals run when they have been still for too long and suddenly remember they have legs. They disappeared into the forest without looking back, which is the correct behavior for wild animals returning to their element, and which required no interpretation. Valentina watched until the tree line was still again. Galina stood beside her and wrote in her field notebook. Akhtar sat at Valentina's feet and watched the tree line with professional attention, because his job was not finished simply because the bear had left. His job was the tree line, always the tree line, and he took it seriously. That evening, Valentina stoked her stove and sat at the kitchen table with her tea and thought about the moment the bear had sat down. 12 meters away, in the dark, in -71 degrees, and she had sat down. Valentina had been thinking about this intermittently for 3 days without arriving at a conclusion, and she did not arrive at one now. She was not sure a conclusion was available. Some things that happen in the taiga in winter do not have conclusions in the ordinary sense. They have only the thing that happened, and the silence after it, and the question of what you do next, which in this case she had already answered. She had answered it with a key and an open shed door, and the simple, unglamorous logic of the situation. The shed was there, the bear needed shelter, the door could be opened. It was not heroism. Heroism was for stories, for the accounts that got told afterward and inevitably became larger in the telling. What happened in her yard on that January night was smaller and more specific than heroism. It was a woman who knew her landscape and knew the animals in it, and who did, in a few cold minutes, what the situation required.